Hey Homeworthy, I'm Daniel. Welcome to my home in Oklahoma City. Come on in.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hi, I'm Daniel Barrett Mathis. I am a lawyer by day and a collector and a maximalist by night and also by day. I'm sometimes known by my handle on Instagram called Not a Minimalist, and welcome to my home in Oklahoma City. So I've been collecting my entire life. It's probably the first thing that I felt naturally inclined to do. I had, in the second or third grade, I started collecting erasers and key rings and rocks, and that was just sort of something I enjoyed doing. I enjoyed curating and putting together all of these various things, and then that sort of just carried throughout my entire life. I grew up in Mississippi and born and raised, went to undergraduate there and to law school there, and then ultimately ended up practicing law in Texas. And in Texas, where oil and gas is a big industry, I ended up doing a lot of work for a large oil and gas company that's based in Oklahoma City, and I moved here to work for them 13 years ago. When I first moved to Oklahoma City, I was living in an apartment in downtown Oklahoma City. It was a block from work, and I really loved that apartment for a couple of reasons. It was kind of small, but I had 20-foot ceilings, and so after a few years of settling into that, I started really having fun with building these huge gallery walls on these giant walls that went, 20 or 22 feet into the air. And that was kind of the way I was expressing, I guess, my maximalism and my, inclination to collect things, collecting art. And then I started rekindling, my interest in pottery. I had been buying, there's a collection that you can probably see behind me of white pottery, and I started collecting that about 25 years ago. But I just put it in storage. And so it was many years later, and really in this house, it's the first time that I ever have had it displayed. So then I started sharing photos on Instagram, and Not a Minimalist was born. So when you first come into my house is a small little entryway, and you definitely get a dose right away of what's to come because there's no shortage of color or texture in this small space. I often say that my entryway is a little bit Gucci and a little bit garage sale because I do have this sort of high-end wallpaper that was manufactured by Gucci, and it appealed to me because I'm a fan of orange, and so it had orange. That's kind of one of my signature colors. And I also like the graphic nature of the G's that are repeated in the geometric pattern. I like fonts and script and words, and so it appealed to me for that reason. But I also thought that, a small space like this was a good place to do something fun like that and something that's a little more expensive. Everything else in here is secondhand. I bought, on this wall we have kind of this vignette with the centerpiece being this beadboard cabinet. I bought that at an auction in Mississippi in the late 90s, and I paid $90 for it, and it's been one of my favorite pieces ever since. It's kind of got this good greenish blue color, and it's also got storage, and it's a really good size, and it will fit a lot of different places, including nestling into this entryway where you don't really want something to be in the way, but it's a handy spot for collecting things. I've also just got a collection of canes and yardsticks and even an umbrella in there. This chandelier I bought at an antique mall in Mississippi on one of my trips home. And then the two sconces are, again, Jonathan Adler pieces. I like the whimsy of the hand holding the light, and it also is kind of echoing the brass and black combination that I have throughout the house. So I guess the most fun thing is when somebody walks in, almost everybody says, "Oh wow," and I think that is a big compliment, and it's a bit of a surprise. And I like that. So I want them to feel something and see something that maybe they've never seen before. And I think that's fun. And so, I think that you kind of get that feel in the entryway, and it's foreshadowing of what's to come in the other spaces. So when you first come into the house, to the left is my living room. It's quite a big space, as you can see. This was one of the spaces that appealed to me about the house. Originally, this was a duplex, and the prior owner, about 20 years ago or 25 years ago, renovated it into a single space. And so this room would have originally been 2 living rooms. There would have been one on the far end facing that side of the duplex, and then one on this side facing this way. And there were 2 fireplaces in the middle. Those were taken out. The new fireplace at the end was constructed. The ceiling was vaulted, and it made for a really large living space that really lends itself to being divided into 2 different areas the way I have it here. So on this wall in the living room, I knew that I wanted to install my collection of tramp art mirrors and to display some of my other tramp art pieces. And if you don't know what tramp art is, it's a type of folk art, and it was I think it started in like the late 1800s and into the 1930s and 1940s, both in the United States and in Europe. But it generally describes this technique of taking cast-off thin pieces of wood and layering them in a graduated way and then chipping the corners. So sometimes it's even called chip art because of the technique that they use to cut the pieces of wood. It's often in frames or picture frames, and also in boxes, little keepsake type boxes that they would make. And it was often by untrained artists, which I think is where the term tramp originated. I think that's a relatively 20th century term. I love the intricate detail involved in it. I love the fact that it was pieces of layered wood and that it was really worthless cast-off supplies that they used to make these really beautiful pieces. And so what I like to do for the frames, I like to have mirror installed in all of them so that it kind of brings them all together as opposed to having all different kinds of pictures in them. And so I knew that I had this tall wall here that could accommodate those, and so that's where I have the mirrors displayed. And then in the corner, I have some of my other pieces of tramp art, which includes candle holders and a lamp, and as I mentioned, some of the keepsake boxes that I have in the shelving over here. And it's something that I really loved for a long time, but I didn't collect it initially because it can be quite expensive. And then eventually I found a really large mirror in Kansas for a really good deal, and then that broke the seal. Then I'm in. I've got my first piece, and my collection of tramp art began. This is a really large space, and it really lended itself to having 2 discrete sort of seating areas, and I really wanted that too. And so I've divided it by using furniture, and it's really both sides are just an eclectic mix of different kinds of seats. I like Killam, as you can tell from my rugs, and so I have a couple of newer pieces of furniture that are upholstered in Killam. Most of these were made by the Sundance company, and you may be familiar with their catalog. I think they have since stopped making this kind of furniture, but those pieces are a favorite. I've got a couple of modern chairs mixed in. There's the cardboard chair, I think it's called the wiggle chair, and that's a newer piece that I bought. And then the little bench here is a Goodwill find that I had upholstered in African fabric. I like the graphic nature of these fabrics, and to me they kind of all work together, sort of exemplifies my eclectic taste. So on this side of the room, it's a little more comfortable, I would say. I've got a couch that was from an antique mall that is super comfortable. It's in the upholstery that it came in. At some point, I might decide to reupholster it, but so far, I've been happy with it. I've got on the coffee table a collection of just random things that I like to look at, so it's not as practical for putting your feet up, but it's enjoyable to look at. And then probably one of my most famous collections is in the black shelving to the left of the fireplace, which is my collection of Ozark roadside tourist pottery. Sometimes it's just called Ozark tourist pottery or Ozark roadside pottery, but it is one of my favorite collections, and I discovered it in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I bought a piece not knowing what it was, and later did some research and realized that it's a pottery that originated in Hollister, Missouri. The guy's name was Harold Horine, and it was in the 1920s, 1930s. He began making this pottery. The mixture of clay that he used was something that he formulated, and then the painting technique was something that he developed, and he patented both of those things. It can be found, in all around, because it was also a tourist purchase. It was sold at roadside stands along common tourist highways and pathways, and so people would buy them and take them home. But it's pretty hard to find because it wasn't particularly mass-produced, not in the way that my white pottery collection was, so there's just not a whole lot of it, and so that makes it a little bit more fun to collect because it's typically a slower build collection. So here to the right of the fireplace in the living room is the transition in the hallway down to the pot den, and I had some art on this wall, but I was just never satisfied with how it looked because it was it competed with the art that was on the other walls in the living room, but I wanted something to transition into the hallway, and I guess I could have left the wall blank, but that's not what I do. So ultimately, I decided that I had this collection of vintage flags, and that it would be, maybe if I hung them vertically and just let them hang, that the softness of that would be a nice counterbalance to the stone on the fireplace and just the shapes of the art on the wall. And so I've been really satisfied with that. So on this wall in the living room is really just an assortment of Southwestern inspired items and art. It's hard to live in Oklahoma and Texas and to not be influenced by the Southwest, and I particularly like to go to New Mexico and to Santa Fe, and so I started collecting paintings of the desert, and so they are mostly contained on this wall, and including a collection of what were tourist items that I have in this cabinet. And if you may notice that this cabinet is also tramp art. It is definitely the nicest, most special piece of tramp art that I have. It is very hard and unusual to find furniture that was made in that technique, but this is a piece that I spotted in an antique mall in Dallas really not that long ago, and I had shared it in my stories on Instagram, and I didn't buy it, and I got so many DMs about how could you possibly have not bought that cabinet that I immediately deleted the story and messaged the antique mall on a Saturday night that, I'm gonna call you tomorrow when you open on Sunday and possibly drive back down to Dallas from Oklahoma City to get the cabinet. So I did, and I'm really happy that I did. It is definitely a favorite piece that I have in the whole house. It's very special. So one thing that people ask me a lot is how to, display multiple collections in a way that doesn't feel just like plain clutter. And I really never intentionally didn't do that, but a lot of people will come over and say that it doesn't feel busy, it doesn't feel cluttered in here, and I've had, in examining kind of what I do, it is a couple things. One, probably the most important thing that to me is to keep your collections together. And so throughout my house, if I have multiple collections, they're typically displayed all together. We saw behind, to the front of me, the Ozark pottery that's all contained in one spot. I don't even have a single piece of Ozark pottery displayed anywhere else. And if I did that, it would kind of bother me visually because I've tried that and it just felt out of whack, and so I end up isolating and aggregating it all back together. And so that tends to be my first rule of thumb. And then the other thing is just to keep your collections varied in size and color and texture. I have another swirl pottery collection. I wouldn't put it in the same room with the Ozark pottery because they're too similar and they're going to sort of compete. Similarly, in the back room where the white pottery is displayed, I have other collections in there, but it took me a little bit of experimenting to kind of figure out what will work in there without competing with each other. And so I try to find things that complement each other, but not compete. I've been a renter pretty much my whole life. I moved around a little bit with work and then went back, I worked for a while and went back to college for law school. And so if there's anything that will make you a minimalist, it's moving frequently. And so I dabbled in minimalism. And then as I said, I kind of got back into maximalism eventually when I was settled into an apartment here in Oklahoma City. Well, when the pandemic hit, everybody was pretty well sequestered at home, and that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me in deciding that I needed my own space. And so I didn't want to move unless it was, a serious upgrade, both in space and really just in all the things that I wanted. And so I started looking for a house in Oklahoma City, and this one, had been on the market for a little bit. I looked at it almost a year later and then decided, let's look at it again. And it appealed to me for a couple reasons. One, I love the location. And then for what I do, I needed a lot of square footage, but I also needed a lot of walls. So I was looking for kind of the opposite of what everyone else is looking for. I didn't want an open floor plan. I wanted a closed floor plan. I wanted a couple of big spaces that could accommodate my specific collections, including the pottery behind me, because I knew I needed a big wall of built-ins to display those. And eventually, this house started looking like maybe it could work. One of the biggest changes I made was to take out an entire bathroom and closet adjacent to this room and to turn that into a space for a bed, and then it's already connected to the other full bathroom. And so now I have a little secret primary suite off of this room, and then that left this room that I could convert into a den. Mainly, the goal was to construct these shelves that are behind me so that I could display this white pottery collection. Okay, so we're in what I call the pot den. This was originally the primary suite for this house, and so I converted it into a den so that I could hold my pottery collection and then a number of other things. On this wall, I have some religious memorabilia and art. It kind of appeals to me because the colors are always really rich and interesting, and there's just something about it that I enjoy and like. It also kind of combines has some crossover with some of the collections that I have. For instance, this piece is made out of tramp art, and so that one appeals to me for a couple different reasons. This piece of art is something that I made. This is an African textile that I got on eBay, and I affixed it to just a pretty standard frame, and then put the art light there. And then as we come around this way, I've got more religious art that I have put around my television. I do like to watch TV, although I don't love having TVs in my spaces. I do have several of them, and here I've got a frame TV that you can put art on it, and it kind of blends in with the wall. And so under the TV, I've got one of my favorite pieces of furniture. This is by a company called Noir Furniture, and it's actually a hutch with some storage where I have games and things, but the wood cutout application on the front I always thought was really cool. It's one of the pieces of furniture that a lot of people comment the most about when they come over. Most everything here is either from antique malls or flea markets, online sources. Other than the Noir piece, nothing is new. These are some cool lucite chairs, also from a local antique store. I kind of like to mix mid-century modern with old, and then a few contemporary pieces. For instance, the large gray sofa and the sort of rattan coffee table in the center of the room, those are both Jonathan Adler pieces, which are, he's a contemporary potter who also sells home furnishings. I've always been a fan of his. And then under that, I just have layered rugs. I really like Killam rugs because of the colors and the shapes, sort of organic shapes that they have. And so in here, I've just layered a few. This is probably my most monochromatic room in a way because there's not a lot of different colors in here, even though there are a lot of textures. So, I guess in that vein, maximalism isn't just about lots of different colors in the same space. It could be about lots of textures, lots of big prints, lots of things. And so this room is maximal, but there really aren't a ton of different colors in here. It's really just the oranges and sort of the earth tones. So then as we work our way around, we really get to the main wall in this room, which is one of the reasons that I bought the house and was to accommodate this pottery collection. This is all American-made mid-century pottery, and it's all in matte or satin, white or cream. There's probably 6 or 8 different manufacturers represented here. One of the most common ones, and probably the most prevalent in my collection, is McCoy Pottery. You may have heard about that. They were prolific in manufacturing pottery in the United States for many, many years, and with several different companies actually in the family that made that pottery. And I started collecting it at least 25 years ago. At the time, my rule was it's got to be satin finish, and I wouldn't pay more than $10 for any single piece. In building a collection, that tends to be the way that I do it. I will assemble a large number of the pieces before I invest in the rarer and the harder to find pieces. But it really is a dream come true for me to finally get this pottery out and to display it like this. And it is a lot of work. The number one question that I get on Instagram everywhere is, how do you dust? Who dusts? All the things. And so far, I have been the only person who has dusted in this entire house. And I'm not saying that will continue to be the case, but at least so far, it's all done by me. And it's a lot of work. And so, even preparing, for this tour today, I've touched every single surface, I think, in this house and every single object, and really for the first time since I moved in and finished remodeling. And so it is a labor of love, and I'm enjoying it for now, and maybe at some point it won't be as practical of a way to live, but for now I'm having fun. I'm not really a person who has favorites, but I do kind of have a couple of pieces of this pottery that stand out. One of them, if you can see on the top shelf, are the 2 tall pieces and the shorter piece that have fins. And so sometimes those are called, it's a bit of an Art Deco design, and a lot of people call them fin vases. And I'll try to point them out. There's a short one here, and then a very small one, and then 2 taller ones. Those are kind of a favorite. I really like that design, and they're pretty hard to find. So that's one that stands out to me. So a couple of the newer things that I have in the den. One is this chair. It's a plywood chair that is made in this sort of grate format and then carved out to make a seat. And it's actually surprisingly comfortable. It was made by or sold by a company that was based in Dallas called Wisteria. They used to have catalogs that came out all the time, and I think they've since discontinued doing that. But they had an outlet store in Dallas, and on one of my trips into Texas for work, on the way back, I stopped in and saw the chair and loved it. And so I've had it for maybe 12 years, and it's definitely a favorite and sort of a chair that a lot of people ask about. Also new in this space is the chandelier. It's giving kind of sea urchin vibes a little bit, and it's also probably hard to dust like my pottery collection, and so I must have an affinity for things that are high maintenance. But I loved the color and I loved the interesting shape. It is a Kelly Wearstler design, and so it's a new piece as well. And so I like to mix, new with the old. So then as we work our way around here, in this corner I have a collection of shell art. It is just something that appealed to me. It's kind of, I don't really know, I like organic things and I like natural things, and so I think it appealed to me for that reason. But there's also something just about the assemblage of all of these small things to create these boxes and frames that is kind of similar to how I display my collections. And so I think it's a little bit of an exemplified way of doing what I do with my collections, is kind of exemplified in the way that people create these pieces with all the small tiny shells. Maximalist definitely describes my design aesthetic, and the other ways to describe it sound pretty cliche, but they're true, which is it's very eclectic, it's very collected. I have things that I bought many, many years ago, and when I bought them, I envisioned my future self living in a place kind of like this, where I would have those items that I loved back then, and I was hopeful that I would like them in the future. And so it's a very time-worn, aesthetic that I was committed to for a very long time. I mentioned some of these collections that I've been collecting for over 20 years, 25 years, and that is a commitment. That is, you're all in, and I didn't get tired of it. I didn't deviate from that, and it was a slow and fun process, really with a long-term vision of how I wanted to display it and could see it way down the road. I never knew for sure if I would ever have a place that I like this, where I could do that, but that was always sort of my goal. So I've always had this really long-term vision of the spaces that I wanted. That's not to say that your taste doesn't change. It definitely does. There are definitely things that I bought and later I'll be like, why did I buy that? Or I don't want that anymore. But mine is, my aesthetic is very much personal. It's not for everybody. I know that. And I usually hope that if it's an aesthetic that some people might not want in their own home, that they at least can appreciate, I guess, the art that I'm trying to express and the work that it takes to curate and display things like this at my house, because it is a lot of work. All right, so come on in and I'll show you the primary bedroom hidden behind the bookcase doors. This is my bedroom, and it was originally a bathroom and a closet. So the front part of this room was a full bathroom, and then it transitioned into a walk-in closet. As we looked at the floor plans for the house originally, we realized that when this house was a duplex, it was originally a bedroom. And so by removing the bathroom and the closet, which is a little unconventional to take out a bathroom, but this house still has 3 full bathrooms, and so it's not a problem. It was about a 15 by 15 space, which is plenty of room for a queen-size bed and a chair and everything you need in a bedroom. And so then this room sort of became home to all of my sort of science collectibles. I've got scientific models in here that are German or European in nature, and just a variety of displays of shells and arrowheads and things that are very organic. But probably the coolest thing in here is this collection of mushroom specimens that are over the bed. These are European. I think a lot of them are German, and they are, scale models of a variety of mushroom specimens. I just think they're super cool. It's probably not super practical to have them in here, but they're okay for now, and I'm really enjoying them. So as a maximalist, one of the things that you try to do is to pull all your rooms together in some way, even though you have so many different types of things around. And so color is a good way to do that, and I do try to have a balance of color throughout my house and scale and shape. And so when sort of designing this room, the wall color is actually the same color as the background in the pot den shelving that houses the white pottery. So behind the pottery is this, it's called chamois. It's kind of almost like a peanut butter or caramel color. And so I pulled that into this room, and it also worked in here with the things that I wanted to put in. Another sort of accent color that I have throughout the house is sort of this Kelly green that's on the blanket on the bed, which is also the color of the top of the light fixture in the center of the room. And so there is some continuity. There's a sort of a thread of similar colors throughout the house. And I also used black, it's called caviar, but it's almost a black with a little bit of blue in it on all my doors and on a lot of the window trims and things like that to sort of ground these spaces and serve as sort of a neutral backdrop for all the crazy colors and things that I have. So I created an Instagram account to share my collections, and I started that because I didn't want to force feed my hobby on my friends and family who were following me on my personal Instagram. So I thought, well, I'll create a new one. It'll be a place where maybe like-minded collectors and things like that could, interact with my hobby. And I kind of wanted a handle that was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and so Not a Minimalist came to mind. It's easy to remember, it's easy to spell, and I started this Instagram maybe, I don't know, 7 years ago maybe, and before long it sort of took on a life of its own. I had this sort of alter ego as Not a Minimalist, which is what I am not. I am not a minimalist. And around that same time, maximalism, which has kind of always been around, I think, became a little bit of a trendy buzzword too. So I kind of lucked out a little bit in creating my account dedicated to maximalism and maximalist design at kind of a good time. But yeah, surprisingly, it kind of resonates with a lot of people. And I think it's definitely a counterpoint to a lot of the very sort of clinical and monochromatic spaces that don't have a lot of personality. And I think the interest in that aesthetic that I have that kind of increased after the pandemic is maybe because people were home so much and they wanted something that wasn't so boring, and maybe they wanted more things around for interest. But for me, it's just an expression of my personal aesthetic. I really do intentionally try to avoid fads and the look of the day, and to not be referential in what I'm doing. And so you kind of, it's interesting to look at Instagram and all of the accounts for inspiration and magazines and all those things, but at some point it's kind of also good not to look at all of those things and to see what you can generate just out of your own brain. So this is the dining room. This is one of the rooms that the prior owner renovated and expanded when she did the renovation. And I have never had a real dining room before, so I was excited to do that and to get a real dining room table. That is one of my favorite things about this room is the dining room table. This is a newer piece by Noir Furniture, the same company that made the sideboard that is in my den. That's very interesting. And I just loved the chunky legs on this table, and I also loved the black that is similar to the wall color that I've used in other spaces. I knew that I wanted to hang this wall of vintage portraits in this room, and they're super colorful, and so that was the springboard for the wall color, which is called Shinkle Green. It's Annie Sloan's new wall paint, and it was so great, and the color is perfect for these portraits. The chandelier that you see is really probably not my taste per se. It was in the house when I bought the house. I was on the fence as to whether to try and incorporate it or to change it. I was originally planning to change it, and then as I started to furnish the room and I was taking some snapshots and I would see the chandelier adjacent to some of my really rough I guess you would say, art, I kind of liked it. And so then I thought, well, maybe I'll try putting black lampshades on it and kind of tie it in with the rest of the lighting in the house that I'm using. And so it's still here. And so I've kind of grown to like it. I think the mixture of that, something that is very much more precious than typically what I would put in the house against some of the things that I use, is kind of interesting. So I like it. So I bought the table for the dining room, and then I needed chairs. And so one day I was headed to work and from the neighborhood, and somebody down the street was having a garage sale. So I saw some chairs in the driveway, and so I pulled in and I bought 6 of these, probably I guess 1980s. I think sometimes they're called waterfall chairs. I'm not sure if that's exactly what these are called. And they were all upholstered in a velvet and needed reupholstering. So they lived in my garage for quite a few months until I decided to get them reupholstered. And then I decided to do them in all different colors. I have 2 that are in black, and then 4 that are just in random colors that I pulled from the portraits on the wall. Then later, I was in Santa Fe going to antique stores and consignment stores, and I came across the two head chairs, which are upholstered in a variety of Killam fabrics. These are vintage Surratt & Sons. That Surratt & Sons is a company based in Santa Fe that sort of pioneered upholstery with these Killam rugs, and so you'll find couches and a variety of different upholstered pieces that they made through the years. And these are another one of my favorite things in the house. These chairs are really great, and that's where they're from. And then in the center of the table, I just have a collection of vintage brass candlesticks that I've put sort of chopped off black candles in, just to sort of tie in the brass and to give some interest in the center of the table. But probably the thing in the dining room that I get the most questions about is the wall of portraits. These were all painted by a guy named Claire Seglem, who lived in Oklahoma City, and I think he was about 93 when he passed away a few years ago, and his family was having an estate sale at his house, and an Instagram friend of mine messaged me, "Hey, I know you like vintage portraits. I was just at an estate sale, and the gentleman was a painter and had tons of art." And she sent me a couple of photos of these portraits, and I immediately, jumped up and ran to the estate sale and bought about 50 of these portraits, and they're just so special. He painted them in the 80s at a studio in Oklahoma City where the subjects would, I guess, show up and model for the painters. And so they're all from, mid to late 1980s. And his daughters subsequently discovered that I had acquired a lot of his paintings and was sharing them on Instagram, and that people were appreciating them, and they were, really happy about that. And one of them mentioned to me, she's like, "Well, his signature was the elongated noses." And so then I observed that, yeah, I can see that they kind of all have a similarly elongated nose, which probably makes them kind of work together as a group. So over in this corner of the dining room is a cabinet that I got at Goodwill, and it contains a collection of miniature furniture. So there's a company called Vitra, and for many years they have made these miniature scale models of famous mid-century furniture. And there's something about them that always appealed to me, and so over the years I have collected a variety of them. So for instance, in the living room we saw my full-scale size wiggle chair, which is made out of cardboard that is laminated together, and they have a similar chair, and I think I may get the fraction wrong, but I think it's a 1/6 scale model of the chair, and it's also made out of cardboard that is laminated together to give it stability, and each piece is replicated using as close to the same kinds of materials as the large pieces that they can do. And so there's just something sort of fascinating about that. And I've got a variety of chairs and ottomans and it's just another collection that I've enjoyed building, and they're special enough that they really needed a cabinet that would prevent them from getting dusty and things like that. So coming out of the dining room, we go into the east hallway, and this is where I've hung really a whole gallery of what is typically referred to as yard-long photos. These are vintage and antique group photos that were often 36 inches long, and so the term yard-long was coined to kind of generally describe them, although a lot of them are either much larger or much smaller, and so I began collecting those many years ago and just kept going. And so these could be, a lot of them are military, a lot of them are businesses, business meetings, colleges, groups of kids, a band. There's just something interesting about it, about them. And now my collection has gotten so large that I kind of only focus on ones that have some unconventional subject matter. Aside from people, maybe there are animals or buildings or plants, things like that that are appealing to me. So this is one of my spare bathrooms, and in here I probably made one of my more practical decisions, which is to cover the walls in a collection of vintage tourist plates. So, it's a bathroom that doesn't get used all that often, and so it lends itself to being a little unconventional on the walls. But this is another collection that I started by going to estate sales frequently and seeing these pieces often for 10 cents or 25 cents, and eventually I started collecting it. It's very kitschy, and I resisted collecting it for a long time, but then the more I saw it, the more they appealed to me, and so I started collecting these maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and when I moved in, I kind of wanted somewhere to put them, and so this bathroom seemed kind of a fun place to do it. As I said, it's not particularly practical, but it's kind of made for a fun conversation piece. In looking at the tourist plates, there was something about this sort of mustard color that made sense with them, and it's a color that I've repeated in my kitchen, and it also kind of echoes back to the colors that I used in the pottery den in the back of the house. And so that was the color that I chose for the walls. And then since this is a functioning bathroom and has a shower, it needed a curtain, and so this shower curtain was one that I had made. I found this fabric that is reminiscent of the Killam rugs that I have throughout the house, and so I had someone local turn it into a shower curtain. It's really hard to come up with the favorite thing about my home, honestly. I often say to my friends that I don't have favorite things, and that's kind of true. I have always had a difficult time picking a favorite food or a favorite anything, for whatever reason, I don't know why. But I guess the favorite thing is just being able to do, it's actually both my favorite thing and potentially the least favorite thing is being able to do whatever you want to do, because I thought moving into my own house that it would be really great to be able to paint whatever color you want, to put things wherever you want, to make a hole in the wall wherever you want. I've always been, obviously I have a ton of things on the wall, so I am not careful with my sheetrock, and that is kind of a favorite thing, to be able to do whatever you want. But it's also can be not such a favorite thing, not such a good thing, because when the options are limitless, there's a lot of noise that creates, and so it can be difficult to kind of pare down to the right thing to do. And that's what some designers are really good about. I don't really call myself a designer per se, but I found out that I'm a really slow designer. I'm a really slow decision maker, and it took me quite a while to get to the place that I am. So this is the room that I use as my office. It's actually a bedroom that I've decided to use for working, and I've got a couple collections in here. One is this collection of swirl pottery that's called Namaji pottery, It was another tourist pottery that was sold for many years in the United States. I usually say it's the pottery that I hated so much that I started to love it, because I guess I got to the end of hate and there was nowhere to go but to start liking it. And so then I started collecting it, and I sort of decided that I thought it looked very cool as a group as opposed to individual pieces, which are maybe not particularly appealing on their own. I think they are a lot of fun together. So I've got a big cabinet over there and then another cabinet full here. In addition to that, I have an assortment of vintage caricatures. These were made by kind of like they are today, either on the sidewalks of New York or San Francisco or New Orleans, or at fairs and state fairs and things like that. And so these were made in a variety of places around the country. Interestingly, though, I accidentally started acquiring ones that were by the same artist. And so I could tell by the colors and the style of the caricature, and then when I started sitting down and looking at signatures, I realized that some of them were by the same caricature artist. So they're a favorite. Now we're in my kitchen, and the kitchen was particularly a little bit of a challenge for me. I've never really decorated a kitchen or been able to decorate a kitchen. And what I wanted in a kitchen was something that looked old. I mean, I think I wanted sort of I'm not sure I achieved it, but I'm a big fan of the unfitted kitchens that you see in European homes that have been there for a long time and have a combination of cabinetry and freestanding furniture. And so originally I'd planned to gut this space and start over, but that just didn't make sense because I don't feel like a person that should have brand new cabinets, especially since I'm playing with crazy colors and bright colors and sort of unconventional things in the kitchen. So ultimately I kept the footprint of the kitchen the way it was. This house was built in 1977, and so I think the footprint of the kitchen is pretty much as it was when it was built. The prior owner, I think, added a few of the upper cabinets in the dinette area, but otherwise everything seems original. And I kept the countertops that the prior owner had installed. The color is kind of similar to the concrete floors that you see in the house that we did a grind and seal on. It was kind of a happy accident that those floors turned out kind of interesting and that the color kind of matched the countertops that were in the kitchen. I did, however, change all of the appliances, and I changed all of the hardware on the cabinets. I relocated the knobs for the cabinets. They were center mounted in the cabinet door, which was a very 1977 thing to do. And so I actually physically did all that myself. I painted all the cabinets in the kitchen. I had professionals for most of the house, but in here I kind of decided that I needed to do it myself because I kind of wanted to experiment with colors. And so I spent maybe 6 weekends in a row taking all of the cabinet doors off and putting on new hardware and painting all of the cabinets. And so it kind of took on a little bit of a Mexican feel in here, and not the least of which of the reasons why is due to the backsplash that I had installed. And so the backsplash is obviously very colorful. It is a terracotta tile that is from Mexico, and when you order it, when you just get a box of a variety of colors, you really don't know how many of each color you're going to get or what you're going to get. And so they're also all slightly different shapes. And so the tile guy who installed the tile was very diligent in trying to make them as square as possible. And then he was very good at tolerating me being about a few steps in front of him, laying out the colors in the pattern that I wanted on the wall so that not too many of them were side by side and that sort of thing. So I would lay out the tile and he would work for an hour, and then I would come in and he would be caught up to what I had done, and so then I would lay the tile out some more. So he was very tolerant with that, which would probably be annoying to a lot of contractors. I also changed out the sink and did a lot of brass hardware in here. One thing that's challenging about using the existing footprint in a house, and this is probably a no-brainer, is that it's a little bit of a needle in a haystack to find appliances that fit in the existing spaces, especially if you're looking for a particular color or finish. And I really fell in love with the black stainless steel and the brass accents, but the manufacturer of my refrigerator and dishwasher did not have a 27-inch double oven. So I had to find a different double oven that was complementary to those colors to fit there. And then I had a gas stovetop put in where it was electric before. So kind of had fun doing the kitchen and continued the black caviar walls in here as well. And then have a collection of a new collection, because I've been buying it recently, these Mexican small plates that I've hung around the top of the kitchen. Okay, so adjacent to the kitchen is a pretty typical dinette area, and I have breakfast. This is where I have my coffee every morning and watch the news on my iPad. And I wanted a table in here, but I kind of wanted to mix it up a little bit. So this is another example where I incorporate something very modern with these sort of older things. This is a tulip table from Design Within Reach, and I've paired it with a couple of chairs in white. These green chairs, wooden chairs, I bought at the Canton Flea Market outside of Dallas, Texas, many, many years ago, and have never really used them until now. So on the table, I've got a variety of these what are called caged glass pieces. These are Mexican made. It's another sort of brutalist design that I've been a fan of for a while. So I've got a number of these in different colors of glassware and pitchers and vases. And so I just think they go well with the aesthetic in the kitchen. This is new dinnerware, kind of in a similar color scheme as some of the older Mexican pottery. I've got a vintage McCoy piece with the flowers in it, another Killam rug in here, and just a variety of still life art pieces. I've actually got a pretty large still life art collection over in this corner. I think a home exhibits soul when you can tell from what's in it a little bit about the person who occupies the house. And I think that's why a lot, it's you want to inject some personality into your space. You want to have some things that are different from everybody else. You want to make decisions that are a little unique, to inject a little personality. And I think that gives a house or a home more soul. I mean, I think obviously people walk into my house and they kind of have an idea of what, maybe what's going on in my brain a little bit, could be a lot. If you have a very sparse house, it's harder to tell anything about who occupies it in that way. So this room off of the entryway, I call the library. It's because it had these built-in shelves, and I think the former owner used it as a bit of an office. And I kind of got it styled and set up as a little bit of a sitting area, and also with another table and chairs that would be fun for putting food if you have people over, or maybe for playing a game. One of the things I liked about this room obviously was the shelving. I decided to paint it the sort of Kelly green to echo the color that I have in the dining room. And then, as we talked earlier about the color in my bedroom, and then I have pops of this color throughout the house to hold a variety of things. There's at the top of these shelves is another collection of pottery that is also McCoy pottery and other manufacturers similar to the white pottery that I have. It's just in black. It's a little harder to find. They didn't make quite as many pieces in black, probably for obvious reasons that it maybe wasn't as appealing to folks at the time, but it's something that I enjoy collecting. And then I just have a variety of other things in the shelves. In the center of this room, I've got a table that came from Goodwill that I painted. I've got a set of these really interesting chairs that are upholstered with this Killam style rug. These actually were in my hometown in Mississippi, which was kind of funny to me that I was able to find those right in my own backyard. And so I didn't do anything to them other than just give them a light cleaning. Another upholstered piece in Killam, and then just a small couch that sometimes I like to sit over there or lay over there and watch TV. And I do have a little rollaway TV that's on a stand that I stash away in a closet and roll out and put near there if I want to kind of huddle up in this room and watch TV. The word home to me, I guess, means a lot of different things. It's obviously a literal place where you live, but it's also more than that. And I grew up in Mississippi, and I haven't lived there though in over 20 years, maybe even 25 years, but I still call that home. And that's because it's familiar to me, it's comfortable to me. There are people there who love me and lifelong friends and things like that. And so I think it will always be home to me. But Oklahoma City has also become home to me for the same reasons now, because it's familiar to me, it's comfortable to me, and luckily there are people here who I think love me as well. Homeworthy, this has been great, but I need you guys to leave because I've got to get in the car and drive to Santa Fe because there's an estate sale tomorrow where I'm hoping to buy more pottery that I collect. So, goodbye.
Thanks for watching. Go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content and shopping guides.